or circumstances that would be very conducive to doing well in school because they live with several different families or different family members, or maybe they rent a room because that's all they can afford. And so you say, well, that child could still study when he or she comes home from school, and perhaps they could sit on the floor and try and do their homework with a lot of other distractions going on. And yeah, well, we might say that's possible. Think about it objectively and from a humanitarian standpoint. Is that really possible? And lastly, that these disadvantages tend to concentrate among the poor, and the effects are cumulative, meaning that, yes, it's poor education during adolescence. Therefore, they didn't learn how to read. So they didn't do well in school, which means that they couldn't go to college. And so these things are cumulative. And they may be deficient in many areas. So they may have poor education during adolescence, and they might have a bad job, which is a dangerous job, and they live in poor housing and generally don't earn enough income for their family. And that the longer people live in stressful conditions, the greater the psychological wear and tear they suffer, and therefore the less likely they are to reach advanced age in their life. So life expectancy is lower. So if you look at how this social gradient plays out, and these are data that I have pulled from a layperson text written to address the social determinants of health called the spirit level. And what you see here is income inequality along the x-axis and life expectancy in years along the y-axis. And we actually have the different states. And so each state in the United States has been rated for income inequality. And immediately you notice there to the left that Utah ranks very, very favorable in terms of income inequality. Utah also ranks very favorably in life expectancy, and so that best fit line there, the regression line, shows a very strong relationship between income inequality and life expectancy. And of course you see the states that rank very poorly in income inequality: Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, West Virginia, Kentucky, Arkansas, South Carolina, Georgia, Oklahoma. Certainly those are all tied together geographically. Those also rank very poorly in life expectancy, among the lowest, well, the lowest in the United States. So now, different outcome, not just life expectancy here, but the index of child well-being. And so what we have here is the outcome presented by country. And in the United States, you may not be surprised to learn, ranks very, very poor in income inequality, meaning that there is a huge gap between the rich and the poor. And not surprising, based on what we have just learned about the social gradient, we also rank very poor in child well-being compared to other developed nations. Countries such as Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Japan, that rank better in income inequality, generally have better indices for child well-being. Index of health and social problems, and this is by state. And of course you see the reverse pattern from what you saw in life expectancy, meaning that countries, again, that fare very favorably in income inequality, so these would be those, states on the left-hand side, such as Utah, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wisconsin. They are the states that have lower indices of health and social problems. Drug use by country, and again income inequality, and you see the same patterns here. Developed countries that have high income inequality, the United States, the UK, Australia, also report very high rates of drug use. Despite, in the main, I might also add, harsher penalties and more kind of punitive approaches at drug use or drug prevention. So it's almost like our reactionary approach tends to not be as effective as the underlying prevention strategies being used in other countries, not implicitly for drug use, but to reduce social problems in general. Now this is interesting, given that the life expectancy in the US is lower, we have greater income inequality, but what you notice immediately is that in the US we spend more, considerably more than any other country in the world on health expenditure per person, yet our life expectancy is among the lowest of these select developed countries. So really very interesting data. Index of health and social problems, so not just by state as we looked at previously, this is by country. And you notice that the USA, you almost didn't see it because it's clearly an outlier up at the very top right corner, and so we rank the highest among these industrialized countries for health and social problems. Teenage pregnancy here, and what you see is that, again, the U.S. is an outlier, very top right-hand corner, and high income inequality and very, very high rates of teen pregnancy compared to other industrialized countries. Homicides per million, again, the U.S., very high income inequality and very high rates. Now, what you see here is data that shows that based on occupation, there is dramatic differences in life expectancy. So if you're a professional, we'll just look at males. We'll look at females, so that the orange bars. The trends are similar for both males and females, of course, as you can see, but a professional female has a life expectancy of approximately 83 years. Data from the UK, compared to an unskilled manual labor of a life expectancy of around 77 years. So that's approximately a 5-year difference. And these are not individual cases. This is a population as a whole, which is very, very convincing then. When you consider, potentially millions and millions of people. And so this is very believable data, and it's just a very nice stair-step function as you look down, that as you become less professional, potentially lower on the social gradient, a professional would certainly be higher than a skilled manual laborer, who would be higher on the social gradient than an unskilled manual laborer. Okay, the next one, stress. Stressful circumstances make people feel worried, anxious, and unable to cope. They're damaging to health, and they may lead to premature death. Social and psychological circumstances can cause long-term stress. So think about that. Social and psychological circumstances can cause long-term stress. So you think about the stress that might come from living in a dangerous neighborhood. Social circumstances, and you're worried about your children. So that stress doesn't just go away when you, go inside or something. I mean, it's a persistent chronic stress. Anxiety, insecurity, low self-esteem, social isolation, these all affect health, and they're all related to stress. And long periods of stress are more common in lower classes of industrialized nations, and so there's certainly some biological plausibility here. Let me read something from the spirit level. So the psyche affects the neural system and in turn the immune system. When we're stressed or depressed or feeling hostile, we are far more likely to develop a host of bodily ills, including heart disease, infections, and more rapid aging. Stress disrupts our body's balance, interferes with what biologists call homeostasis, the state we're in when everything is running smoothly and all our psychological processes are normal. When we experience some kind of acute stress and experience something traumatic, our bodies go into the fight or flight response. Energy stores are released, our blood vessels constrict, Clotting factors are released into the bloodstream, anticipating injury, and the heart and lungs work harder. Our senses and memory are enhanced, and our immune system perks up. We are primed and ready to fight or run away from whatever has caused the stress. If the emergency is over in a few minutes, this amazing response is healthy and protective. But when we go on worrying for weeks or months and stress becomes chronic, then our bodies are in a constant state of anticipation of some challenge or threat, and all those fight or flight responses become damaging. Chronic mobilization of energy in the form of glucose into the bloodstream can lead us to put on weight in the wrong places, and even to diabetes, chronic constriction of blood vessels, and raised levels of blood clotting factors can lead to hypertension and heart disease. While acute momentary stress perks up our immune system, chronic continuing stress suppresses the immunity and can lead to growth failure in children, ovulation failure in women, erectile dysfunction in men, and digestive problems for all of us. Neurons in some areas of the brain are damaged and cognitive function declines. We have trouble sleeping. Chronic stress wears us down and wears us out. So think about chronic stress. And now, if you're an executive at a large company, certainly you experience stress. But is that a different type of stress than somebody that lives in a low-income housing, a very dangerous neighborhood with high incidence of mortality and homicide, high rates of drug use, and other violent crimes, where you're worried about your children because you live in a single-parent home, and you work two jobs, so you're trying to keep track of your children, who you assume are probably getting into trouble, and that is a chronic, persistent stress. Now, if you're an executive at a large company, certainly you need to impress shareholders, and you want to increase revenues, and you're concerned about your bonus and all of those sorts of things. We tend to think of that as self-induced or acute stress, meaning